Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Saturday Night Fever from 1977. And this is the winner of the Patreon movie review vote loyalty pick. That is a movie that has been in the vote, or what used to be the raffle, for a long period of time, and this has been in there since the beginning of the movie review raffle and the movie review vote. So I'm finally reviewing Saturday Night Fever. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge to my Patreon, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. And this movie was chosen by Manny Valencia, and thank you very much for all your support since I started my Patreon. It's very cool of you. Saturday Night Fever is an interesting movie to talk about because how the public views it and what kind of film it actually is are like incredibly different. Although it is the fun disco movie where the guy tries to prove himself through a disco competition, it's also very much a 70s drama. In fact, most of it is kind of a depressing character piece of a 70s movie. I think the way it's made shows the kind of Hollywood it was made in, and that is, these kind of small, depressing New York, dirtier, almost independently made character slice of life films were kind of normal. I mean, this isn't an unusual, the disco part was unusual, and John Travolta being a lead was unusual, but the movie itself and how it's made was not. I think it's actually a very good, almost kind of standard 70s kind of character movie, one that I've seen many, many times, and one that anytime I catch it on TV and it's like late at night, I will end up watching because it's really good at it, actually. And this time when I watched it, I found it interesting because I was like, it's not as pointed. You think of a youth film, which this very much is. Tony Manero is about 19 in the film, saying he's 20, but he's 19. A lot of people say 23, don't know why. Most of those films have a point. They aren't this slice of life. They aren't this open to interpretation. And that's something I think that is really interesting about Saturday Night Fever, because it is a far more deeper... How deep is this film? Okay. It's a far deeper and more inquisitive film than I really think you'd give it credit for at face value. Sure, John Travolta's pointing in the air like this, and it's like, disco, and it's goofy and things. But looking at those images and looking at the press photos at the time, this film is about growing up, realizing the difference between what you like and what you love, and finding a way to do it. Going from who you are to who you want to be. Having that idea of the big gates going to Manhattan like it is a magical, wonderful place. Being a kid growing up in Bay Ridge, wondering if he'll ever get out of it or he'll be stuck there forever, but also kind of just showing this part of his life. Is that the right interpretation? Is this just a part of his life and he never moves on from it, and he thinks and questions what's going to happen, but then eventually just settles and never moves on? Saturday Night Fever has all that fear and doubt within it, but shows you that he can really be free and amazing on the dance floor, which John Travolta really does in this film. I think this film is so wrapped up into disco and its soundtrack over its view in the public that it often gets lost at how really great and interesting this film is. Don't let the soundtrack of this movie be more than the movie, because I think, as awesome as the soundtrack frankly is, this movie is the better kind of interesting character piece 70s film that it probably gets a lot of credit for, even if the soundtrack for most people is drowning all that out. It's still at its core a really great story about a kid in Bay Ridge trying to find himself and find out what to do with the next part of his life. Tony Manero, who every Saturday night after working at the hardware store, paint store place where he works in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, goes to 2001 Odyssey and dances the night away. And he's an incredible dancer. He's the star kind of dancer of that disco club where he goes every Saturday night. Usually he can only afford to go one night a weekend, but he goes. This one girl, Annette, really loves him and wants to be his dancing partner, and he kind of reluctantly says yes, but then he sees a beautiful girl named Stephanie who works in Manhattan and wants to be her dance partner because he sees that she's an amazing dancer. So then they start rehearsing to compete in the 2001 Odyssey big dance competition, and Tony tries to prove himself and do the thing he loves while also getting close to Stephanie and trying to figure out if he wants to still work at the hardware store / paint store or continue dancing with the rest of his life. A lot of how this film is made, if this was made now, would probably be considered kind of an indie movie, and it's interesting thing, this was originally going to be directed by the guy who directed Rocky, and during pre-production he was fired actually the same day he got nominated for Best Director for Rocky. And much like Rocky, and although he has the Rocky poster on as well, and Stallone obviously directed the sequel, these are kind of smaller productions. They're grittier. It's used a lot of Steadicam effects. That grittier, kind of more naturalistic style really puts you in it. There's something about that first Rocky film that feels very intimate, and there's something about Saturday Night Fever that absolutely feels intimate. When he's walking down the street right at the beginning, it's a really iconic, amazing scene. It really gets you going. Staying Alive is pumping. You get the feeling of like he feels like he's the king of Bay Ridge or something, walking down the street with his paint cans, eating his 2 slices at once. John Badham, who directed this and was a TV movie director in the 70s, and TV movie directors in the 70s really knew how to do their shit and do it very well, and knew how to make these kind of films. Knowing 70s TV movies, I don't know them incredibly well, but I know them pretty well, and I'd seen another one he directed called Isn't It Shocking with Alan Alda, and he directed some Night Galleries, and he was a TV director, and you get from this he's very much a journeyman director, but very good at what he's doing, and knew how to get the project done, but get it done in kind of a more smaller kind of Hollywood at the time, which was more influenced by certainly foreign auteurs. This is very much a film made by somebody who went to art houses in the 60s and saw Bergman and Truffaut and all that stuff, and you can tell that in this film, and you might think I'm going a little too far, but I think 70s directors definitely understood from the foreign auteurs. American 70s, even journeyman directors, understood what they were doing and why they were doing certain things, and the kind of existential doubt that was going throughout all of 70s Hollywood. John Badham's really good at bringing that into the character of Tony Manero and making him both doubtful and interesting and complicated. He's not like a character who, he's sexist, and sometimes he's racist, he's misogynist. Travolta certainly plays him in such a positive, charismatic way. You kind of let that go. I don't really like any of his friends who are seemingly like him, except they like to get loaded a lot and can't dance, but attitude-wise, how different are they really? And Travolta is able to play that in a way that makes him really the standout. He has that charisma in him. If you had more of a meeker performance, this would just kind of go back and meld into the 70s background of everything else. Travolta brings out what's special about it, and John Badham knows how to use him. It's interesting when you think of all of Travolta's other performances, there's no one that's so sullen and kind of almost more reserved in some places, but also charismatic. Director-wise, Badham worked well with a good star. If you look at what he did with War Games and Matthew Broderick in that film, and even Johnny Five in Short Circuit, he's very good at finding a charismatic lead and doing something interesting with it. Less so with Short Circuit, but I just want to bring up Short Circuit. And I think Travolta is just so charismatic in this. I love young Travolta because he was so dedicated and so happy to do everything and so into it. And obviously we've gone through several different versions of Travolta at this point, but he just felt so hungry to be there. The dancing scenes, particularly the "You Should Be Dancing" scene, that is the scene. That is like why he's a star. Like, holy shit, some of those shots when it's like the camera's like a little down and he's doing the thing where he's like pointing like this and stuff, clearly that was a good representation. It's just awe-inspiring and beautiful. Some of the best on-screen dancing anyone had seen since like Gene Kelly or Fred Astaire, and Travolta was so good at it. He wanted you to believe that this guy had rhythm and could dance and could move, and it worked incredibly well. But he also understood that he had to act also. He wasn't just this guy who was there to do dance moves, and Travolta could do all of those things, much like an old Hollywood star. But the interesting thing is, oftentimes when I watch Travolta now, I think of him as a 40s, 50s classic Hollywood star. When I watch him in Saturday Night Fever, he feels so 70s. I don't think about what he's doing, although I know what he's doing. Musicals weren't as cool, they weren't as big then, and he finds a way to incorporate it into this thing, and he does it so fluidly. I'm not thinking about how he is doing it. He's just doing it, I'm dealing with it, and I'm accepting it, which says a lot about Travolta as an actor and Badham as a director, that they're able to get this to work as well as they did. Now, this was based on a magazine article by Nikki Connery, whose name I butchered probably, called The Tribal Rights of the New Saturday Night. This is kind of a big deal that it's based on a magazine article, because films weren't based on magazine articles before this, or at least not as much currently, but although Fast and Furious is based on a magazine article, or at least the first one, but things like Silkwood certainly, and a lot of things in the 80s and late 70s were, because of the success of this. And what's interesting is the writer of that article mentioned later that he made it up, and he kind of just went to a disco, or he talked to someone who went to a disco, but none of that happened, and he made up the characters from the 60s mod scene, working class England. And what I know of English cinema, and particularly another movie Saturday in its title, Saturday Night and Sunday Morning, the working class English English background thing, I can definitely see in Saturday Night Fever. Like, I can totally see it, and it makes total sense that he definitely used that. They changed some things from the article to the movie. The character that he made up in his article was called Vincent. They changed it to Tony. That was apparently from his friends in England going in the 60s, and it shows kind of how universal the quality is. I think there is a very universal quality to this film. Like, Gene Siskel, this is one of his favorite films. He saw it like 17 times, apparently. The idea of, hey, it's Saturday night, we want to go to the club. And I know that feeling. I went to mainly rock clubs and stuff, but I know I can feel that excitement at the beginning. I can feel that, like, I've worked, now I'm going out, we're getting drunk, let's joke around with my friends, let's be exciting. And it makes it more exciting because one of the cool things about movies is seeing someone be good at what they do. And Tony Manero is like flawlessly good at it, and no one else is, and he's not sure what he wants to do with his dancing, but he knows he wants to get out. I like how open-ended this film is. I like how it doesn't give you an answer. It's not like, some talent scout sees him and he's huge after this. He wants things to change, and he sees where his future is going, and he doesn't exactly like it. And it's kind of an unspoken thing throughout this film, but I think they play it very, very well. What I think is also interesting is watching it this time, I did notice the open interpretation thing. I did notice that you don't really have the competition really speed up until, like, You Should Be Dancing is an hour into this movie. Like, there's an hour where they're just setting up mood. Like, it's very like structure wise is an interesting film, because I think it like kind of plays fast and loose with what it's doing, and is mainly concerned with Tony Manero more than like anything else, probably more than the plot, which makes it so relatable. I saw Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and this kind of reminds me, I guess that should remind me of this because that was later, but the whole idea of doing a snapshot of a young person's life, just showing a segment and what that means, and that, he could probably do greater things after this. This could be it, but you don't know, but you're just getting that. And I think the structure of this film does that very well. I don't think this is a perfect movie. It's interesting that there's certain plot lines that don't entirely work. The priest brother thing, Ebert in his piece even commented that, like, it's like he's on his way passing by to another movie called The Priest or something. Like, he's not really fully developed. I think Tony's starting to see, like, not everything works out and stuff, and is supposed to represent that, but it's kind of weird. The whole thing with them, like, getting revenge on their friend who got beat up, I, like, don't even understand why that needs to be in there. I like so much of the rest of this film, I kind of just let it go. And to be honest, I forgot about the fight thing. I knew about the priest brother thing, but I forgot about the fight thing. And most people I brought it up remember the priest, because the priest brother's in, like, the big You Should Be Dancing scene, and the other stuff isn't. The other stuff is just like, you could forget about that. That might be because there are two versions of this. There's an R-rated version, which was the one that got popular initially, but as disco became more popular and John Travolta became more popular, particularly with Grease, they released a PG version, and both versions played on TV at various times. But it seems as the DVD era started, they sort of just stopped releasing the PG version. It was released on VHS, but not on DVD, and the DVD I had was R-rated. It would be interesting if they had both on a Blu-ray. I think that would be cool, but to be honest, I don't need a bastardized shitty version of a movie. It's like, if you're gonna do a deluxe edition, knock yourselves out. But it was mainly made for kids to see it and experience it. Most kids couldn't see it because it's like very R-rated. I love the soundtrack to this. I actually have the soundtrack right here. Well, my wife has it. This is an easy album to find on vinyl, and it's a double album. It's got all this stuff in it. Like, look at how cool the pictures are, particularly that part. And it is actually a good album to listen to. I think the music in this is really amazing. It's interesting, I didn't know how much of the album had come out on previous Bee Gees records, were already hits before the movie came out. Some people have said this is part a new Bee Gees record, part a disco best of, and disco was kind of going out at the time. I'd heard that fact before, that disco was kind of going out, that it seemed like it was sort of over by the time this movie came out. When I was watching, I was like, there's no indication that what he's doing is cool. It's just he's so into it, which is kind of interesting. There's no indication that it's cool. It's that he's cool. And I think that's what works so well about it. I will always probably really like Saturday Night Fever. And if you've never seen it and are just going to kind of laugh at me for talking about it or whatever, I highly suggest you do see it, because it is probably one of the seminal 70s films. And it shows, I think, more about 70s Hollywood, that one of its more popular and populist movies is so dark and questioning of where he's going, and not as easy to interpret as necessarily it should. I've heard people say, revisiting this since the 70s and go, that movie's a little messed up. I mean, there's like a lot of disturbing things in it. There's a lot of cursing. The characters aren't necessarily the greatest people, particularly Tony Manero. There's rape. There's all sorts of things in it that I think people find a little more difficult to go down. But although its character isn't the greatest person in the world, you still can see yourself in it, probably because he isn't perfect, probably because he's not the right person necessarily or anything like that. He just wants to move on and get out of Bay Ridge and do something else with his life. Or since he's simply just having the moment where he's realizing this is going to be the rest of his life, and eventually he won't be able to dance anymore, and that'll be it, and he'll just work at the hardware store. And that depressing fact lies before him, but until then, he can be king on the dance floor while the Bee Gees play real loud on a crazy light up floor. I think this is more of a typical 70s film, but it's very good at it. It's almost genre 70s. John Badham does a very good job at that. And you can tell a very good 70s TV director at the time could definitely pull this off. And John Badham does it very well. It's just that he had a star to do it with and a great soundtrack. And it kind of really accentuates how good of a director he could be at certain times, and how good just a journeyman director could be in this era, and how well they could use those influences to make something as modest and intimate but also feel as alive and exciting as this movie does. This movie's got a lot of contradictions and emotions in it, and it really does feel like a really interesting slice of life of the late 70s. And Saturday Night Fever is probably one of the most well-known films from the 1970s, and the reason for it, I guess, is because it can grab you and make you think about your coming future and what that future holds, while also getting you to groove out to some cool tunes. So if you've seen Saturday Night Fever and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. Also, if you would like me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge to my Patreon, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.